with anyone out there. Make sure we're.
Just you guys, got 100% attendance, that's awesome.
Woohoo.
Hey. All right. We're on. We're live.
So we'll start the meeting with Kathy giving us some of the policy.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kathy Richardson, the City's Sustainability Director. Just a few housekeeping items for tonight's Zoom meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you are not speaking. The chat function for this public meeting is disabled. All chats will go directly to me. All board members, and there aren't any board members on Zoom right now. Everybody's present, so I'll skip that section. And then the city does reserve the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distractions during the meeting. And now I'll turn it back to you, Nancy.
Okay, thank you. So the first thing we want to do is consider approval of the February meeting minutes. Any comments about the meeting minutes before we vote for approval? Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Or abstain? Okay. Do we need to say the public comment stuff or just go on?
Yeah, there's no one here for public comment or on Zoom, it looks like. So, yeah, you can either just go ahead and skip over this one, or if you want to, if somebody does pop in, maybe later on in the meeting, if there's time, you
Okay.
might want to revisit public
Okay.
comment.
We could do that. So now let's have the staff report on grant funding opportunities from Kathy.
Yes. So I was chatting with Nancy and gave her a little bit of an update on some grant funding for environmental sustainability commitment. And she was just like, oh, that would be great to share with the whole board. So number one is, I think you all remember me talking about the EECBG funds that the DOE had kind of these allotments for cities and some other organizations. And there was a competitive round, and then there was also ones where we just had a certain amount of money set aside for. So City of Lawrence had $147,000 for EECBG. You know, we had filled in we still had to do an application, even though that funding was there for us. We did choose to receive that in the form of technical assistance. We had asked for an energy plan for the City of Lawrence. We had asked for a feasibility study on solar for our facilities and feasibility on electrification of our existing facilities. So those kind of three big reports would be funded with that $147,000. Now, earlier this year, we just stopped getting communication about this. We would have gotten started earlier this year, and other cities were in the same boat. I know I talked to several sustainability managers and directors, especially those in the Midwest, and you know, we were calling, trying to find information, and hadn't heard very much. So city kind of started losing some hope in maybe that funding still being available for this project. But we did receive communication from the DOE about 3 weeks ago or so, and that was to kind of finalize some of the paperwork for this EECBG funding. So that was very hopeful news, you know, of like, hey, we're still in this, and we might be able to get this project started. So we were happy about that. We have routed the paperwork that needs that city manager's signature so we can submit that to the DOE. They did specify in the email that they're still in the process of hiring an administrator for this program that would then assign us a technical assistant person, right? They're the ones that choose. We don't get to use the funding to hire a consultant in this area. So the way the program works is that they assign. So they are still trying to fill a position to get this rolling, but I will give you all an update if we hear additional news about it. But I just wanted you all to know, because I think the last bit of communication I had shared with you all is that we just hadn't heard anything from the DOE. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. In the meantime, while we weren't sure what was happening with the ECBG, we did have a conversation with the state of Kansas that had some funding for some like planning work for climate action, right? So they had reached out to the city of Lawrence and asked us if we were interested in doing some more climate action planning. And I said, well, we just worked with the county for a countywide climate action and adaptation plan, and our city commission had just approved that last year. So does that disqualify us from this funding? And they said no, because we can drill down on those strategies and goals and kind of have a better work plan of what Lawrence is going to focus on, right? So you guys, I'm sure you've all looked at the climate action and adaptation plan, but there's a lot in there. Some stuff which is stuff that the city is working on right now or has prioritized through our KPI work. So this funding could help in that respect. The funding that KDHE has also would help us with paying for a greenhouse gas inventory, which can be community-wide and also municipal, like operations-wide for City of Lawrence operations. So there's a lot of flexibility. And we talked about a lot of different projects that could be funded through this money. It's $200,000, so a little bit more than the EECBG. And we are currently working on finalizing the agreement. So this still has to go to the city commission for approval. This is not it's already a done deal, and we've got, the funding to get started yet, not yet, but we have worked through the agreement, and that will go to the city commission for approval. This funding comes to us without a match, so there's no match requirement, which is very, very helpful. We're really excited because there's a lot of work, especially pertaining to those 3 KPIs that we've been talking about that have been prioritized for environmental sustainability. One of them being the one that you all had said you wanted to focus on, which is the greenhouse gas emissions one. So I think this funding is really going to help in that area. So just an update on that. It's definitely a positive. So for both of them.
Great.
Any questions on that?
Are there any expectations or actions on our end for either of those if they were to move forward, or just continue to receive updates?
There's really no expectations for this board, but I did want to highlight the funding because it is related to the KPI prioritized work, which you all are also, working on. So I just wanted you to know that we potentially may have some funding to do, again, absolutely need to get it's not just the greenhouse gas inventory, it's ICLEI can help us do projections of, if the city of Lawrence did this one thing, how much would that impact our greenhouse gas emissions, right? Is that going to lower it, and by how much, and so forth. So I think it's good for you all to know. I'm usually the person that says, there's no budget. Sustainability has a tiny, tiny little budget. But this would be super, super helpful. So we just feel pretty lucky to have that connection that was made, and that we may soon be able to get a lot of this type of work done.
So in what form would be the state fund be? Like, is it going to be for hiring consultants, for, reimbursement for things? I don't know how it works.
That is a good question. So it can be used for a variety of things. You can hire a consultant to do some of this work. You could, pay an organization like ICLEI to do, some of this work for us. They obviously are experts in that field and could really help us get some good information, good data to make decisions moving forward. The funding also could go to like a part-time temporary help person, so the city could hire somebody on a short-term basis. Obviously, it's not a whole lot of money for an ongoing or a full-time and ongoing type of position, but something that's short-term, somebody working on this, one of these projects. I did also want to mention the funding is available through mid-2027. So about 2 years.
The Kansas one.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah,
Other questions?
that's a good question.
What was the acronym you used? IGLEI?
ICLEI?
What is that?
It stands for something specific, but just so you know, they changed that because now people don't know or talk about the organization based on ICLEI. Now they label themselves as ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, and that does not equal ICLEI. But they've tried to clarify, so it's Local Governments for Sustainability. The city has been a member of ICLEI for a very long time, joined right before the city moved ahead with its first greenhouse gas inventory for that climate pollution prevention plan. So we've maintained the membership. They do they have a lot of information. They're a great resource for the city of Lawrence, but they also own the software that either the city can go ahead and use that software as part of the membership to enter all the data, or you can have their staff do that for you and do reports and stuff like that. That's who the Douglas County used for the county-wide greenhouse gas inventory, which was the first one ever completed, and that was completed for this climate action and adaptation plan.
And you said that something they could do would be to try to identify the most impactful approaches that we could use to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Yes.
in the city.
Absolutely. That is something too, like just tied to, like, how does this board tie to all of it? This funding could go to pay for some of this work from ICLEI. ICLEI could be potentially somebody who comes to one of the meetings or Zoom, right, and gives a presentation on the data that they've collected so far, or, some of the discussions of the projections and stuff like that. So it all kind of comes together, yeah.
Good. Okay, the next item on our agenda is to discuss the greenhouse gas emissions priority KPI that we had chosen to work on this year. And everyone was given links to the presentation that Motion had given to the previous version of this board. I hope everybody got a chance to take a look at that so that we could discuss that and see if there's anything we want to pull out of it to begin to discuss a policy that we'd like to put forth. So I thought it was a great presentation that we had. I watched it for a second time, having been there the first presentation. But I think there's some things in there that we might want to consider of putting together some possible policies to put forth before the city commission. So I want to hear other people's thoughts on that.
You did an excellent job.
Yeah.
It was very,
Thank you.
very well
And
done.
to start the conversation, I have prepared a handout.
Ooh, excellent.
Thank you. There you go.
Thank you.
So, the problem that we identified was energy inefficiency in the rental housing in Lawrence, and it becomes important when considering that more than 50% of residents in Lawrence are renters. And research shows that energy burden, the percentage of household income that goes towards utility bills, is already higher for renters. So having that concern, and also knowing that most of the buildings, residential buildings in Lawrence, are old, built before the year 2000. They are energy greedy, inefficient, and that's common in Kansas as well. So knowing this problem and having identified it, we started to brainstorm some policy solutions to address this, but the board, it happened what happened. So now we need to pick it up from where we left off. And I look at this problem through multiple stages. We already identified this problem. We know that it exists, and multiple different entities from the city, county, and nonprofit organizations in our community are thinking about it and to address it. So then I think we need to think about the resources that we have in the city, in the county, from our potential allies that we have in the community, to put everything that we have together to be able to come up with a policy that could address the problem and be effective. And to my knowledge and understanding, neither the city nor the county have the resources to, like, either from human resource aspect or financial, to provide incentives for property owners to actually invest in their properties. So I think at this point, it would be helpful to get an understanding of what the city can do. Like, is it possible for the city to go through streamlining the licensing process for people that invest in their properties, or provide any financial incentives, and also identify the allies that we can have, what the county can do, what, Justice Matters can do, what League of Women Voters can do, what Evergy can do. Then pool those resources together, and rather than coming up with an incentive that is going to be small from the city, we come up with a bundle of incentives, an incentive package that could go toward this end. So, and I suggest some policies, not that I think these are the best things to do, but to start the conversation and not to start from scratch. Like, I've seen people going into rental agreements before, like, hey, I got a good deal. I signed a lease that, and I'm gonna pay $600 a month, but then I end up paying $300 more for my utilities. And so a disclosure policy could be something that we can start with. Like, it's kind of politically gonna be feasible. There's no immediate cost to anyone. And people are gonna be aware of the situation when they get into leases. And it sends, I think, an important signal to everyone that there is a market being shaped around this. Then it's gonna be competitive for everyone. And if I know I'm gonna pay a lot in utilities in this property, I'm not gonna sign a lease with you. And then we can move from there to more effective policies when we know better what resources we have and who can contribute to this. So that's the kickoff I wanted to give to this, and open it for discussion and conversation.
Yeah, so on the disclosure idea, my thought with that was given that most of the buildings are so old, my concern would be what if that's not enough of an incentive? Because if someone sees the utilities are going to be really high here, but they don't have a viable other option with better utilities elsewhere in the city, then there's a the landlord doesn't really have as much incentive because okay, you're not going to go find better. And so my curiosity on that was if you have enough knowledge at this point in time before implementing some sort of disclosure that there would be enough more efficient properties. I guess I hope you get what I'm saying. I'm not forming that well.
You're completely right. If my budget is in the 600s, 700s, I'm not gonna find a much better place, but yes, the options are more limited. I can't go find a much better place, but some buildings are really bad.
Right.
I'm, on average, I myself am paying 40, 50 for my electricity, and I have friends who pay like over 100 in a building with a plan very similar to mine. So that tells something. And I'm paying even less than they are doing. So yes, and I see that also as a symbolic move, that
All right.
this is something to think about for
Yeah.
people. Maybe people even don't think about utilities, and they're like, hey, this is your lease, 600, isn't it great? But I see it that way, but
Yeah, I mean,
I
I'm
can see
still,
that.
I'm still like down for it because I think like my worry was that it's not going to be like as impactful as some of the other solutions. But if it like doesn't cost anything to implement, then you still might as well do it because of the symbolic nature or whatever. But that was just, I kind of don't know if we had an answer. I'm like, maybe we know once we start disclosing, you know,
There's a
right?
variety of quality of the rentals around the area. So some are real, as you said, some are really very bad as far as energy efficiency, and others are okay. I mean, there's not a lot of great ones, but there is a variety. And so if it's policy that you have to disclose not only the cost of the rent, but the average cost of the utilities on top of that, so that the individuals see the total cost of renting that building, then I think that does give some incentive for some minor, cheap mitigation that landlords could do. You know, at least put weather stripping. It doesn't cost them much, but it could have a big impact.
It does seem like, sort of as a starting point, if you get, I mean, the problem with rental properties in general is your margins aren't good at all. And so, you know, somebody wants to have a rental property and they go out and they pick up a house and they then have to pay, you know, 7-10% for a property manager, and you've got to pay your mortgage, and you've got to do this and you've got to do that. Your margins just aren't great. So, and then I think there's sort of I don't think most people, you know, want to be a slumlord. Most people, if they go out and they get a rental property or they're doing that kind of thing, they want to do well by the people that are there. There's going to be a few that aren't, but for the most part, people just want to do good business and take care of the people that are in their rentals. Would it make, I guess my only point here being, given that margins are tight for that kind of thing, and if you take the approach of, we're going to tell you guys, you know, you bad landlords, you've got to do this, that's not going to go over real well. If maybe you reach out to some of the property managers in town, you know, who do this all the time, and they rent their own properties as well as taking care of properties, and say, you know, what does make sense? So if you had like, one of your proposals was kind of like an Energy Star, where you slap an Energy Star on the side of the building, well, that might mean you can increase the rent a little bit. I mean, not to hurt the person in it, but it's actually something added. Why do you buy one washing machine over another? Because it's going to save you some money and you're doing good things. So if there's a way, and I'm not saying there is, but if there's a way to create kind of a win-win, so your property owners are getting something back, maybe a more saleable residence, maybe a higher rate of return, your renters are getting something good out of it, and we're not doing as much polluting. One of the ones that was in your presentation was, you know, just shoving insulation in the wall has a huge effect. Well, you know, is that something, putting solar on the roof of an apartment complex that is owned by 12 different people might be hard. Putting solar on a new building might be not as hard, but then again, we're not building a lot right now. So I guess my only point being, if you bring people on board and get a consensus as opposed to demonizing some portion, it might work better.
I like the idea of an incentives package. I think that approach would probably be more effective, given that any one solution is not going to solve it. In terms of like a win-win, partnerships with Evergy, their existing, the existing other municipalities do we currently participate in the PACE program, the pay-as-you-go? Is that something that may be like a realistic thing, in terms of when you were talking about you may be able to replace an appliance or any sort of fix, that may break down, and over time, they don't have to pay for that, they get it in savings. They have to fix those anyway, so might as well capitalize on that entry point. That may be something that could work. I know that was probably part of your paper, but I would like to explore that further.
Well, we've tried to get Evergy to do those sorts of things in this area, and we've not been successful. So they do have those incentive programs in Missouri, or those assistance programs, and they don't have them in Kansas, despite several years of pushing them to do so.
And is that, when was the last time, was that revisited last year?
23.
23?
I was at that hearing, and people trained and educated by, what is it, Clean Energy?
Cleaner now?
The Clean and Energy Project,
Climate and Energy
Climate
Project?
Yes.
Energy Project, yeah.
that group and Sierra Club trained people to how to show up on that meeting and give comments and ask for that. And many community members on their own showed up. Evergy is not going to do that, because this is a kind of thing that needs to come from higher level, at either from the KCC, the regulator, or the legislature. And they're not going to do it unless there's a regulation they need to comply with. So it needs a lot of push and hard push.
So have they only done it in like Missouri municipalities? Have they done it anywhere in Kansas and they just won't do it here? They just don't want to, or have they given like a reason? Or is it just because we don't have to? Was that?
We tried, we pushed really hard.
No, I believe you. I'm just disappointed to hear that. It just is what it is,
We
though.
couldn't get them to do it in Kansas.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
What was like the primary objection on their end? That it was gonna cost them money, or was it just that residents showed up and said no?
That meeting was one of the drivers of why I thought about doing a dissertation on utility behaviors. Because I was studying energy policy for a few years, and at that meeting, I was like, I can't understand a single word that you say. The energy sector and utility sector is so technical, and then add to that financial layers and everything. And when they talk, and they know what they say, I'm not demonizing them, and they may be right. The thing is that the public, even the ones on the higher end of education and everything, it's not easy to understand. So what they say is that, yes, based on our financials, it doesn't work, and KCC is not there to be the advocate just, KCC is the advocate for the public, and the utility is part of the public. So, yeah, based on their arguments, financially doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So I don't think we got the opportunity to give incentives, much as I would love to have incentives, other than something that we can structurally do that doesn't cost anything.
I think for me, watching the recorded presentation, the one I was most interested in was the green leasing, because I wasn't familiar with that concept before, and then I went on a whole separate deep dive. And to me, I was like, that makes sense, because like then you're aligning incentives with landlord and tenant. But I guess I must have missed, or I don't remember. Like, what was if that was an option we looked into, what would like the city's role in that be? Like, what cost would be associated?
The city can only recommend green leasing, but not require it because it's going to be preempted.
Okay.
So
So it's like a cool thing that's out there, but it's probably not our option to focus on. Okay.
Yeah.
and even disclosures, I don't know if it's going to be preempted or not, but.
Gotcha.
I think we got a shot at trying to do disclosures, that, the landlords have to show the cost of utilities, averaged over some period of time, to add to the costs of the rent so that you could see the whole thing. Then the landlords have incentives to either do some minimal cost improvements to reduce the cost of utilities or not. It's their choice. So in a way, it is incentivizing them because then they could raise the rents because the total cost wouldn't change as long as they did some minimal
Yeah.
improvements to their properties to reduce.
How heavy of a lift would the utility bill transparency portion be? Like, shouldn't you have to also work with Evergy on that, or?
That's what I was wondering, like, how hard is it for managers to actually get this information
Question.
and for them to be able to do the averaging over the specific time period? And like, if you have multiple units, like different levels, like, within a building, like, can you report the average across all or like at levels? Like, I feel like there's a lot of really details you'd have to get into to make this functional. It could work. I just wonder if that level of information is available to managers. I don't know how much they get when they have tenants who are being billed directly from Evergy. If they get reports on how much they're spending, they might not, right?
And I think like there's quite a bit of detail that informs the actual historical data, like number of people living in the unit, how often they were residents of that unit, using language to make sure that it's the last 12 months of renters instead of just the last 12 months. Like, I know we can wordsmith the bill to make sure that
Yeah.
there's not ways of getting around it, like an average of all of their units. But I do think, as someone who's looked into this as a renter, it's always the renter's job to do that call to the utility provider, and it's up to the utility provider to provide that information. I've never once had a landlord provide that information to me. They say, call the utility. So I do think this would probably take some level of consent from our utility providers to provide that data.
But if we make it an ordinance, then they're required to do so.
Well, but I guess my question is does Evergy allow them to have that information? If you made it an ordinance, can the manager say, hey, I need all this
There are
information?
privacy laws that prohibit utilities from
Yeah.
disclosing
That's what I was
information.
wondering, yeah.
Yes, but at the same time, property owners have rights to some data. It's complicated, and that's why I think it should be a collaborative
Yeah.
effort between multiple different entities, city, county, Kansas Corporation Commission, and they should all think about it and come up with something. I don't know the answer.
And that's one of my questions. I think it's a great idea. I just worry about like privacy laws is if I'm a renter, does somebody get access to my data to then, or is
you
it my data or is it the
mentioned
manager?
aggregated data, I
don't
think the
know.
city should also ask Evergy to provide the city with aggregate data at the census level or block
Yeah.
group level. Because then the city can think about targeted efforts to specific areas of town that are actually problematic. Not all the buildings are problematic. We can start from like large complex buildings that are old and leaky and need improvements instead of going all across town looking for people who need to improve in their buildings.
And there's definitely ways to protect privacy, like
Yeah.
when things aren't linked directly to like names, addresses, to get that information. But I agree, I think this would be a one part of the package that would be good for people to be informed and make decisions. Maybe you shouldn't run the dryer all however many times or, what have you. It's just
I think that the other like major concern I have, I'm still on the fence, but like the other major concern I have is, yes, I think it's great to be transparent in terms of total costs out of pocket, like each month that you can expect to pay. But I can envision many renters who are frugal, not knowing who the previous tenants or residents were, seeing that number and being like, oh, I could definitely not run the heater as long or limit my consumption. And so it's almost like we can't control those types of like behavioral changes or thoughts, right? But in terms of actual mitigation, I'd be worried about almost people self-disciplining as like an alternative to
And
the cost.
that's problematic because, first, policies are made based on averages, not like on the ends that are not on average. And not everyone's going to be able to do that or want to do that. Second thing is that, yes, people do manage how they behave, and that's a threat to their health, to
Yeah.
their safety, and many other things that people forgo not going to doctor to get healthcare because they want to keep the lights on. They want to keep the home warm. So yes, people can do that, but they shouldn't.
I just can see, I'm transparently myself, as someone on like a low budget. The landlord is, like, say they're forced to do this, and I see that utility cost next to the actual rent. Not knowing any context at all, I could easily, especially when it's like crazy high for a small apartment, I could see myself logically being like, whoever those past renters were running the heat at like 75. This is
Yeah.
insane. I can get this down substantially.
But why
And then
not,
just
instead of
moving forward.
Just 1 year, do an average over the last 3 years, or something that's a reasonable time period.
That would help.
That would help you.
No, I
Probably
agree.
better
It's
for
not just
privacy anyway.
individual behavior, and since it's the person who owns the building, I don't think it's a matter of privacy for them to get the information on the costs for the.
What about ownership changes?
What about doing something along the lines of almost like a Glassdoor kind of thing, where you simply make it, you make an information portal available to all renters. So in other words, your mandate is as a apartment owner, as somebody who's renting out, you have to provide this little piece of information. What that does is it gives the renter themselves access to a way of uploading that kind of information. Now, over a period of time, well, now you get rid of the privacy problem because it's the person who's doing the paying who's also putting the money out, who's also putting the data out there. Now, over time, you will start to accumulate information on all kinds of different places, and now you've taken the landlord out of the business. And your only mandate now is you must provide this city-run website, whatever.
Yeah, I think that puts the onus then on the city, and that if you have the issue of the landlord does something to mitigate the problem, then it doesn't show up because they're still just looking at past data.
Well,
So I
but
think
now you
there's
can
got to be
say-
some mechanism.
Sure, but
for-
now you can say that where the landlord can, say, well, this wasn't looking great, and I did this, and you put that on the site. The problem with that kind of thing is that people just gripe like, it's going to be, most of the, if you go to one of these employment things, the people that are on it are the ones that had a really bad time. You don't get a lot of, wow, that was the greatest place ever.
The Yelp effect.
So, but again, I think people that do statistics for a living know how to handle that kind of thing, so.
I think you just might not get full buy-in would be my concern from or my concern would be like the people that would take the time to do that would be like, in my imagining, the people that would be like, no to do that. There'd be people, it would be like people with like a little bit more leeway in their budget, people who are a little bit more educated, like it'd be certain parts of like that's my assumption in that situation.
You're probably right.
I like Nancy's idea of making in the actual policy requiring a longer time frame for that average. I would I be concerned again on ownership changes, rent, like that happens all the time.
Yeah.
At that point, again, we still need the utility provider because they're probably gonna be like, change in ownership, there's no data,
No, you
it's gone.
can't do that, because if you purchase a house, you can ask for the data for the last year for utilities for that house. So I don't know why you couldn't still get the information from the last year.
Yeah,
So-
but what if you had, say, property changed,
Yeah.
then you have a new renter, and you get only the last year, but the policy states that you need 3 years of data for that unit.
So you should be able to get the data from the previous owner. That would be required just to provide
They
that.
would hand it off
They
with
would
the
have to hand
property
it off with
handoff?
the property, yeah. And then I think we've got to have something in a policy that if you do certain things to weatherproof or to improve to reduce the utility costs, then there's got to be something in there that would help to, make that apparent to the new renters.
As part of the disclosure, like, here's the historical data, here's the updates made.
Yeah, and this is what would be predicted to, how this would impact those. I mean, is there a way to do that?
There's other ways to capture, I mean, when you were talking about the rental licensing reform, could that be a juncture point where we collect certain data? If you're a renter and you're trying to get certain things, trying to get on the market, you could ask for that information up front, rather than individually from every renter that might come through.
Yeah, we think that's something that the renter, the person who's renting the building would have to provide when somebody's considering renting that apartment.
Unfortunately, in this market, it's like, my God, our apartment's available, bam, you're in. I mean, you don't have time for this. It's because it's not easy to get apartments around here, so, you know, it's kind of like buying a house. If you're not out there in the first 2 days, you're not playing. So,
Oh, I don't know, I hear something different from other people, that there are apartments that are available. There-
okay, it hasn't been my experience with the kids, but it seems to be,
Okay.
you know, something opened up over at there, you know, and off everybody goes. And
Okay,
there's like one apartment available, but it could be depending on where you are and what you're looking at.
okay.
I mean, I think so. I keep thinking about this like as a student, obviously. And so, like, I am in my first apartment right now or whatever. And so, like, because I lived on campus all 4 years during undergrad at my last school. So, for me, I think that, like, hopefully, not that, like, this wouldn't benefit renters of all ages, but, like, first time and student folks, and obviously there's not an insignificant population of those folks here, would benefit the most from, like, oh, I would never have thought to, like, ask that or request that. Therefore, putting the onus on the landlord to do that, I think feels helpful. And so I think that the reason that I mentioned this now is because, like, I know that KU has not had adequate housing because my little sister's a sophomore, and so when she was a freshman, like, so many people in her class, I know that, like, they just could not get campus housing. But I think that that's, like, because there is a huge, like, 2005 baby boom or whatever. But I think that might be the case now. But if you think about the 10 years from now, like, that like rush for apartments might not be the case. And so I know that, like, KU has had record enrollment, and, like, recently that's been more of a problem. But I think that there will in a few years be, the opposite end of the cycle, and it'll slow down. And so getting this in now, even if right now people are like, I just want to take the apartment, you at least have made them informed, aware, and then you can start collecting those 3 year averages and whatever, so that by the time that there is a little bit more, it's more of a renter's market, then maybe that helps then.
Yeah, there is a demographic cliff we're going to hit really soon.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to
So
have a big decrease in.
then we have the recession babies, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so the other thing I'm thinking about is I know we kind of are trying to do this in a way that doesn't cause a lot of work for the city,
Yeah.
but I just don't see any way it won't, right? Like, even if you did something like this where it all falls on the landlord, who's going to be the enforcer to make sure they're reporting accurate numbers? How are you going to check these things to make sure, like, it's going to take some oversight, or why are they not just going to game the system
It's
and just
kind
say,
of
oh yeah,
like
here's.
the idea of a voluntary thing, because, I mean, it takes nothing to check up a little website that lets people upload their data and throw it in a database.
You can get the data directly.
That is super simple. So then you can look at that for a year and see if it even works, or does, as you were saying, nobody puts any information on it or whatever. But there's no overhead.
Could you like build it into something that's already existing, like housing inspections? I don't know how.
Or like rental, like the rental permits, I don't know how long those are good for, or like how often they have to update them, if that was something they had to report every year and it was already stuff you were processing.
You can get that data directly from the utility companies, so I would think you would have to show that documentation. You can't just make it up. You have to show that documentation and show the averages. So you say, okay, here's the last 3 years, here's the average, and you show the potential.
But somebody's got to look at
information.
that, right? That's what I'm saying. Who do you show it to?
The person who wants to rent.
Right, so you have to show them.
So you have to show them the documents and say, here are the averages.
Yeah,
And, if it's like completely off, they're going to know it, because there's the data directly from Evergy, from Black Hills.
I guess I don't.
It's gonna be based on complaints, not that
Yeah.
city's gonna be going out there and
Right.
looking for everyone who's violating.
But don't you need
policy.
comparison data as well? I mean, if
yeah.
somebody comes to me and they say, here's the number of kilowatt hours you're gonna use on average. I don't know what the heck that means.
No, it's
I
not
actually
kilowatt
might,
hours,
but.
it's money.
Should
It's
be
money.
money.
It's how much it costs. You can get that.
Well, sure, but without knowing how much it costs down the block, that doesn't tell me anything.
Yeah, but-
All it tells me is that's what it's gonna cost.
But if you're looking at 3 different apartments and you see the aggregate cost of both the rental and the utility costs is cheaper in one, and it's just as nice as this other one that's gonna cost you much more.
Right.
Then it allows you to make those
So you're
informed
saying that,
choices.
that this has to be done in all advertising? So like in apartments.com, this has to be part of that? Because otherwise, you don't see it as a comparison, you just talk to your landlord, you're only seeing one thing. And generally, you're gonna be searching on, one of these big sites. So you'd have to mandate it to be part of the information that has to be on these big sites. I don't even know if you can do that at a city level. Maybe.
I agree, because, yeah, if it's in the contract, then.
But if you end up going to like 3 property managers and they're required to disclose that, yes, it's not up on the apartments.com, but you go to those 3 property managers and they need to disclose. So
No, I'm
it's
not
not like
saying
you
it's
go
a-
and see 100 different places.
I'm not saying it's a bad idea, I'm just saying that in general, if you're looking for an apartment, you get on big site, you go through 1 million different apartments, you find the ones that you like that are in your price range. If the information's not there, once you go to talk to a property manager, you've taken a next step, you're kind of committed, you're gonna move forward. You need to browse, and that means it needs to
If you,
be in the
if
central
you think about it
repository.
longer term, when it's a common thing that people expect property managers to disclose that, they're gonna put it on the website.
But also you browse so you can narrow it down to like
And-
2 or 3.
But I
and
think-
then you go there and then get more information about how much the utilities are, what's included. You go and see the unit. Maybe that's where you get that
But I
information.
think the temporality of it is important in the policy. Like, being explicit to the landlord or the property management company at what point and at what time is that information required to be shared? Is it at the time of advertising, or is it at the time of physical walkthrough?
Those are
Or is
very
it
great
like a
questions
contract, right?
and very important, but when formulating the actual policy.
Yeah, no, I know.
Like,
I'm just
But,
thinking
but
through.
those are great questions. And
Function.
Dave, your idea is gold for having, I had this idea, and if I had money to invest in that, that's a great business idea. I would do that, not for Lawrence, for the entire US. That's great. If you have money, I'm gonna be,
Capital investment.
yeah,
Not
I
that
love
kind
it.
of money.
Energy companies would charge you a lot of money.
So,
And you get to sell valuable data.
That's right.
That's just
a thought
great.
that I have on the enforcement, I do think it would probably likely be like on a complaint basis, but something Nancy had said earlier was that like, oh, well, then maybe the incentive is that like the landlords are gonna wanna do this because they could theoretically charge a little bit more in rent. Because like, they're not profiting from you spending a whole bunch of money to Evergy. They want the rent, and I don't wanna like ever advocate for anything that's gonna like increase rents or whatever, but I think that like, I would be fine preferring an apartment that is like X number of dollars more a month in rent if I knew that my like energy costs were going to be lower and more consistent throughout the year. Because again, if you're a student signing a lease in May to start in August and you get to that first winter and you find out that like there is like no insulation and then you're just like locked in, like that's horrible. And then you can't budget for that in advance as much. So I would rather have like a slightly higher stable rent figure. And then like the landlord knows that if they can prove to you that they have good energy maintenance in their building, that like they can do that. I think that also like gives them the carrot to want to self-police to some extent.
And plus, it's more comfortable. It's not a drafty place.
Right, it's more comfortable, it's more predictable for my budget, whatever.
Can I, just off the top of my head, I think that's great. And kind of goes back to your point on like, if there's an incentive for the landlords, they can charge a little bit more. I think that kind of self-policing of the landlord network requires landlords to also have access to comparative data, because if they're looking at the rental market, or say they only have their units, right? They're like, they have no idea that their utility costs are 4 times higher than their
probably true.
neighbors. So having some sort of database at the city level, I don't know if that's possible, where landlords can see comparative units and comparative utility costs so that they can self-police and be like, hey, if I drop this down, I might be able to boost my rent a little bit more because I'm competitive.
Isn't this precisely what those funds, like say from Kansas, if we get it, or the federal level, that we could use to like build databases for this, or portal? Like, is that something, we have funding?
So EECBG is a project of the technical assistance to create those very specific items, like the energy plan, the feasibility studies on solar and electrification. The Kansas funds are for planning, not implementation.
So would a plan be data collection? So we could collect that data to decide what would be the best approach for this type of policy?
Not the implementation of how you're gonna
No,
track and
it's
collect the
just-
data. It's that you've prioritized, like, that you've looked at all the different things that the city of Lawrence could do, and you think that collecting, utility data is high priority, and so it
It
gets
doesn't
high.
need to be collected, it's out there, Evergy has it. The
Right.
city needs just to ask.
Well, I was just
Well, will
gonna
they
say,
give it to
I
us?
meant like, I meant more like,
Do something with it.
so you passed this policy about the disclosure, right? And then everybody's doing that practice. In order to self-police, they need to see other disclosures of other like similar properties in square footage in terms of year of building. So there's got to be some sort of like place where landlords who are interested in maybe making a little bit more income themselves rather than that bleeding out to the utilities. Somebody has to collect that and store that somewhere so that they can go see that.
That's why the city needs to ask for aggregate data.
Which
Oh,
was-
I'm saying it like,
Then the planning department
Yeah.
with all the GIS maps and all the square footage that they have, they can provide like benchmarking for different,
okay,
Blocks of the
you're
city.
saying the comparative data would be at the like census tract level,
it depends on.
if they would give it to
How
us.
detailed the city can get data
If
from.
you went to Evergy and Black Hills, what is the granularity of the data? I mean,
I don't know.
because that matters. If they can tell you what the city's using, that's one thing. If they can tell me what apartment 3B is using, that's something totally
They're not
different.
Well,
gonna
they-
give that.
They're not gonna give it, but they have that data, because that is what they're charging for.
But aggregate data at like a block group, at,
Anonymized aggregate.
yes,
data.
they should be able to do that, and the city should be able to ask for that.
I mean, if you could get that from Evergy and Black Hills, that's a great starting place.
Yeah,
So to answer your question, what we've been able to get from Evergy is by zip code.
That's hard to start out, right? Rental.
But,
Just letting, you asked the question, to what degree? So,
I
all the
guess
way
we
to
need
break down.
invite one of the
That's not good.
commissioners at the KCC, so see what they think about this, what's possible in terms of getting data from an energy company.
I think that's probably the biggest limitation is if the city could actually get enough data to try to provide that, right? And that was kind of my point from the beginning was like somehow the city's going to have to get roped in to make this effective, whether that's at a granular layer and just be able to have data to say, this is what these range of rentals are doing, right? I do think there could be some advantage of just having a requirement that landlords have to provide it. It's just, I think that could get really Wild Westish in terms of what's actually provided and what they're actually giving and how much people even ask for it. Because it's one of those things, if you pass the ordinance and the person who goes to rent doesn't know that they have to provide that information, and the landlord isn't going to provide it unless they ask, most of the time it would never actually happen,
Well, we
right?
would have to advertise to
Yeah.
renters, especially, in August and in times.
well,
when-
and I think that goes back to Mosen's question too, maybe not necessarily within the policy, but in terms of strategic partners, who's getting out there.
Who's
and
getting out there informing renters of their rights and like,
Justice
you can-
matters and, yeah.
that's right. And because I think if you got enough renters, if all the renters were informed and said, this is an ordinance and I want to see that information and they have to provide it, they could be essentially the police, or in that sense, right? The enforcers of this.
Right.
But you'd have to educate the renters to be able to ask for that and to know that they can do that and that they have the city backing that the landlords will get in trouble if they
Need a
don't.
KC tenants, but at the Lawrence level.
Yeah, I think we could probably get some of the nonprofits to help with that, especially something like the Sunrise. which is a lot of KU students.
Mhm.
So I think they could help make everybody aware of that. the
Yeah.
renters.
And when you enroll at KU, they give you a big old pamphlet that's like ratings for different, like most popular like apartments, complexes for students and such. And I'm like, well, that's reaching a big audience right there. And then like putting information in there about like, know your rights, get utility info.
Would probably be a big
Perfect.
thing.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And I think there's a lot of ways to think about it. One thing that just pops up in my head is like, I give you the average in reading. Your concern is that we don't know what data they will show. And if I go and sign a lease with you and it's far different from what you showed me, I have something to sue you.
But see, like, this
It's
is
not the
where it
best
gets,
way, but
like, technical, because I don't think it would, because
you.
they would be like, well, you don't know how much that person before you was doing. The landlord could say,
I'm sure they'd
I got
put
this
language.
information from Evergy, it's not my fault, right? Like, I feel like it would have very legal precedent to be able to actually be
And
fought in that sense.
Yeah, that's why I think you need to show, actually have the landlord show the data from Evergy and Black Hills.
But they still won't know, like, what temperature did they set there.
Right, it'll-
Well, but if you average it over 3 years.
If you had the same person living there for 3 years, it would be
Average
the
for
same.
the whole building. No?
Right, but see, not all places are buildings, right? If you just have individual units and they're different landlords, right?
Yeah.
That's why such a thing needs to start from big complexes.
And this is where I'm like, again, aggregate data from the city where the city could do that because it's not individual landlords that have to provide that. And they could be like, hey, no, we've taken the data, we've gotten the data from Evergy, assuming they give it to us. This is the number we're seeing for this area. And over the last 3 years, the average is this. And
But if
making
it's
sure,
at the zip code level, it's useless.
that's what I was gonna say, like, you can't do it at the
It's
zip code.
completely useless, because you could have the best, you could have your house with all your heat pumps and everything else right next to something that's got no roof, and,
Yeah,
I got my solar panels. Oh, my.
that's right.
So you're using nothing, and they're
Yeah.
using
I'm-
just,
I'm selling it back.
Mosen, is there city or various cities that you know of that have passed something like this?
Not off the top of my head, but I think I might have instances in that report that I provided last year.
I think that's important to look at what other people have been successfully
I'm
doing.
sure I've seen instances.
But there's
It's
gotta
not
be
like
some city.
many cities have done it, but there are cities that have done it.
Yeah.
Every city is different, but when we're always talking about, something, that's new to us, we want to find out who else is doing
Doing
something
it.
similar and what lessons that they learn through that process.
it also
what worked.
seems like an awful lot of the things that we're talking about are also apply to just residents, and you could almost say you're talking about something that just applies across the board with the idea of you can't do monetary incentives to do things at the city level. But keeping track of how much energy you're using, how much are you spending on energy, can you lower your energy bills? I mean, that applies just as well to buying a new apartment as it does to getting a new house. So while apartments, I think, is a fantastic way to look at this, and it's kind of an interesting way to look at it and important, it does seem like a lot of these things kind of apply across the board.
Sure.
It's not just a rental issue. I mean, if I could, if it was completely clear to me that making some change in the house over some period of time with numbers I believe will have a return on investment in 5 years or so, I'm all for it. But unfortunately, there's a lot of marketing numbers out there. And there's a lot of people that'll come to your house and say, I'm going to put solar cells on your roof, and there's no cost to you, and 5-10 years down the road, you're on the hook. So a source of truth in that area, be it apartment renting, residential, whatever, would be phenomenal. And, that's where the city could be a source of truth because you don't have a financial incentive, you're just trying to provide good information. Where any landlord, anybody trying to sell a house, everybody's got an agenda of some kind. So, but overall, I think these are fantastic ideas, and We're kind of going around in circles, and I don't think we've hit on a specific policy, but the discussion is very interesting, and I think it's probably important to getting to
And
something.
even if we continue this conversation for another week, we're not gonna land on a policy unless we have people with legal expertise, people
Yeah.
with KCC, with the legislature, with the city commission. We're not gonna get there.
Yeah.
We just need to find all the loopholes here or the gaps here and get closer to it. And we cannot, there's a similar problem across the board for property owners as well, whoever buys a house. But first, they have a lot more resources to do it themselves. And many of the incentives coming from the federal level, from state, are directed toward property owners and not renters. And research shows that property renters are much higher, they experience much higher burdens. So a policy can only do so much, and we can't solve the problems of everyone, but
No,
we can start
you're
from
exactly right. My only point was,
some point.
a lot of the things that we're talking about are not specific to renting, but yes,
Yes,
I agree
absolutely.
with what you're saying.
I think, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, from the strategic plan and the intersecting, like, priorities, I think from like a justice and equity standpoint, shaping and prioritizing a policy around tenant rights is great. Lawrence is a college town with a lot of rental units that are not well kept, like, so I think it solves the problem, and I like this disclosure as a policy solution. So I guess like in order to like move the conversation forward, for me, the big question is enforcement. How do you enforce this and make sure that the information that's being provided to incentivize landlords and renters to make educated decisions about energy usage? How do you enforce that to make it effective? And maybe it's finding or talking to other cities who have implemented something similar to see how they enforce it and how much it costs. And if they contract that, or it's somebody in-house, maybe that's like a good next step.
So what would the best way to get this information about what other cities do similar to this?
I can get this information from other cities if there's an instance out there. And I think we also need to, if we find this feasible idea and something that would be effective, then we need to get the legal staff's input on this. Like what they think, is it even possible, or they're gonna say, no, it's not even,
Is it, so
don't
would
think
it,
about it.
would it be the city's legal staff? Or is that something that we would go to the city commission before we would go to the legal staff? Kathy, what's the order, the correct order of things?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, because this came up with the former board. And I know the former board was also kind of moving forward with like writing ordinances, which you all know, based on the resolution of these new advisory boards, that your job is not to write resolutions or ordinances or anything like that. But you also don't assign work to our city attorney's office
Right.
to write something for you to then present to the city commission. I am actually going to also answer this question by, which is kind of part of our conversation in the next item, just letting you guys all know that there is somebody that I think would be valuable to have this conversation with. This is not a city staff person, but it is somebody that we work with closely, and knows a lot about the KCC, knows a lot about Evergy, but doesn't work for Evergy. Again, has worked with Johnson County, has worked with the city of Lawrence. He actually serves on the Environmental Sustainability Board for Johnson County. And his name is Ashok Gupta. He works for NRDC, so the Natural Resource Defense Council. And he is just an expert in energy-related topic. So I would suggest that would be also a good first step in having that conversation with him. The way we work with him is he's given us a lot of advice as well, so we seek to him for advice. And it's been very helpful. So, I mean, if he were available and if you all would be in agreement to invite him to attend one of your meetings, and he has conversations with commissioners from the KCC quite a bit. So again, that's not saying like getting somebody from the KCC, but just starting the conversation with him. And I've never had a conversation with him where I haven't learned something new, or just gathered some just valuable information. So.
In terms of the process for that, do we need to would that be an external presentation, or can he just come ad hoc and have a conversation with us?
So it is a recommendation from staff, your staff liaison, to have him, come and have this conversation with you all. Based on what I'm hearing, I would recommend him. He is an outside person, like I said, but he's not requesting to present to this board. We would be asking him, the city would be asking him, do you have the time to come out and have this conversation with you all? And it would be helpful for him not to present, but to be here to answer questions and to help lead this conversation.
Yeah, I just have a quick question.
Yes.
Tied to this whole conversation about what our role is.
Yeah.
So to prepare for that conversation, if he were to come, like, what does it look like for this board to propose something to the city council? Like, that'll inform the types of questions that I ask, because the granularity of the policy and like what we can actually put forth to the city is my question. What in this new form, do you have any sense from other advisory boards of the types of recommendations that are being made? Does that make sense?
Of other advisory boards that are, what? I'm sorry.
So we're supposed to be a policy
Yes.
recommendation.
Yes.
So we're supposed to recommend a policy.
Yeah,
We're
but
not supposed to write the ordinance, but we're supposed to recommend a policy.
To
the city
any level
commission.
of detail that we want to write it, not the actual ordinance, but I'm talking of like saying we recommend a utility bill disclosure requirement is different than this is how we propose implementing this with all of these.
And I think I know where your question is going, but I just want to clarify that I feel that Mr. Gupta would be helpful to try to get to what a doable policy would be, or, he might know the answer to a lot of these questions of what you can and can't do in Kansas, and maybe even has examples of what's, worked in other cities and whatnot, although I think that it's important to have that list and to
But
have.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? Like, for me, I'm trying to assess the value of having him come here and dedicating a day to that. If we are only supposed to give generic, vague, rough ideas of policy recommendations that then are sussed out by the legal team and by experts like him behind the scenes, or are we supposed to come up with like fairly thought through? Do you know what I'm saying?
When this board goes in front of commission to recommend a policy,
Yes.
it's not a vague policy.
Okay.
It is the recommendation is to ban plastic bags from all establishments, that are in whatever. The detail of how that happens and what then becomes the ordinance is what the city attorney's office would work on, right?
Okay.
Like definitions of words and stuff like that. If the commission said, ESAB, absolutely, we want to prioritize this policy over other work that's currently being prioritized. So we're going to ask the city manager, we're going to ask the city attorney's office, we're going to ask the sustainability department to start working on this, but only they can make that, decision, because as you all know, everybody's got their plate full. So something has to drop for a policy or something new like this to go forward, to find the staffing resources that are needed for something like that.
So I think the more it's fleshed out, the less it goes on city staff. So if we can gather a lot of information and have a lot of detail in it, then it's a good place for them to start.
Make it easy
versus
for them to say
something
yes.
So there is value in having him come here so that we can put together a more clear proposal or recommendation than just like, we recommend the city find out a way to implement a utility bill disclosure requirement,
Yeah,
Right.
right.
right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
if
yeah.
it was just like, we think that's good, we've thought through all of the things, we have some concerns, but you'll figure it out, versus we figured a few of the things out with your strategic plan and priorities in mind.
I think we should. Does this require a vote? Or can you just informally ask him to come? I think we should have him.
Oh, I don't think it has to be a vote. I think if you all are in agreement,
I think so.
then,
Yeah, great.
and Mosen, if you are okay with it, I would want to share this with him
Yeah, absolutely.
prior to meeting with you all. But I would let you know, I mean, he is a person that travels the nation. He's always traveling. He's pretty busy, so it might not be the next meeting, although I will try.
Well, I think
And-
that it'd be great just, I mean, if he's traveling a lot, maybe Zoom is the
Zoom-
way.
Zoom might be
to
the best.
facilitate it. And I
Yeah.
think if we're all here and he's on Zoom, it wouldn't be a
Yeah.
tough conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also think it would be useful to tell him sort of where this discussion went, and for Mosen to pull those comparator cities, so that you could present that and we could discuss with him
Okay.
for the next time.
Sorry, I know, not meaning to take up a lot of space.
No.
A big concern that I have in addition to this is we are already a fairly technical community advisory board, and we're inviting another technical expert to inform policy decisions, but we're not inviting community members who are renters who would be impacted by these policy recommendations. So if it's not at the same meeting, but another meeting, if there's an organization who is grounded in the community who does this, that we could also have show up and
One
tell
thing.
us things.
That's a great question. And this process is going to take months, if not years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's going to be back and forth between many different groups. And if this idea is just not baked at all.
Yeah.
And if it gets somewhere, it's going to grab attention of people. People are going to show up. People are going to ask questions. And that's great, because then we get to learn how other people think about this. Maybe other people have better ideas. We started from this. We keep the conversation going. And we add many different details along the way. The plastic bag ban, I think it took at least 5 years.
Longer.
I believe that.
More?
Longer, yeah.
So,
I guess I was just saying, like, procedurally, to get to the point where we are showing up to the commission and proposing something, from my perspective, it would be really nice to have already worked through this with core grassroots community members who will be impacted.
two
by
types of groups are going to show up. One, the ones who think this is a bad idea, and two, the ones that think this is great.
I would argue,
Well,
though,
I
that
think he's just saying we need to be intentional about inviting specific
Yeah,
groups.
absolutely.
Two,
think that's all it
before
is.
we,
The thing is
before
that
we propose it
we're
and everybody
not
shows up.
there yet.
Yeah.
We're not even clear
right,
about
but
what we want,
I think the
what's going
point,
to work.
I think the point, or at least the one that I'm hearing, is that it would be really good to talk to people before we put people in a position of reacting to something. And I would argue, I think renters group sounds great. I'm going to come back to property managers again. You need to get landlords. You need to get property managers. I love the idea of talking to somebody technical. I love the idea of talking to somebody from a renters organization. We've got time. And then before you actually put something in print, you've talked to people. Because otherwise, if we put something in print, it's not in print because it's from us, but if we put something out there and it catches people by surprise, or we're only, we're kind of shoving a Band-Aid down somebody's throat, then you're going to get the reaction that you're talking about, where there's, yelling going on in the back room. I think you can mitigate some of that by just doing the work ahead of time.
But I do think you have to have something written, some proposals, some options that you put out there, so that you have something that people can react to and look at and say, okay, this is okay, or this won't work, and this is what you should do instead. I mean, I think you
Yeah,
have to have
you're
something
kidding.
out there.
Could you both maybe, just because I'm trying to understand procedurally, like, us as a community advisory board, I don't think we represent our community, so I procedurally for the plastic bag ban, could you just very briefly say what that looked like at the early stage?
That one is a really difficult one
Okay.
to use as a good
As a
example.
model? Do you have a model of like what?
Because that one just was extended a very long period of time. The recommendation on policy changed because the board changed. A pandemic happened in the middle of all of this, which halted all conversations. So it didn't quite take the normal steps. But to answer your question, I believe, and I know this based on experiences of other boards being in front of the podium and hearing them present to the commission is going to expect that you've already talked to all the right stakeholders, that everybody's been included. And if you answer a question with, no, actually, we didn't talk to that group, they're going to say, go talk to that group and then come back.
Okay,
Like,
and
for instance, with the plastic bags, we did talk to different grocery
Retailers,
stores and
yeah.
retail grocers and people that would be
okay.
affected by that. So
Like-
we did talk to them,
And-
the board did talk to those people.
And
to try to get-
procedurally, you invited them to a meeting, or you just all went out and talked to them and came back and reported?
Well, the things have changed. Now we can't do subcommittees. So before we had a subcommittee that worked on meeting with people in the retailers.
So
The whole subcommittee did not meet with each one of them, though. It was one person who volunteered and said, I'll go and reach out
talk
to.
these
Yeah.
people. So that's what I'm trying to get at, I guess, is like,
Well,
all
wasn't,
the stakeholders that will be impacted by this decision.
Yeah.
We engage them before we put together a formal policy, which is pretty flushed out, but we leave the specifics to you all.
Or provide options.
And
or,
provide
you know,
options.
Something like
You
that.
can feed. Thing is that, I think first we need to have a complete idea, even if it's not with all the details, but it needs to be a complete idea. This idea just has a head, but not a hand or a leg.
I hear you.
And then we need to invite people, we need to hear for what people say. At the end of the day, we're trying to do a good thing here. We're not
Yeah.
demonizing anyone or don't want to disrupt anything. So we need to understand what the real needs are. Maybe the research says this is a problem, and the article that I shared, we had interviews with low-income families going through navigating this system to get some assistance to pay their utility bills, tells us that some of them tear up, come to a cry when someone tells them, we are here to help you.
Yeah.
So that's a problem, we know that. But we need to understand how to specifically help those people in need. And yes, then we're gonna need to hear from landlords, property managers, what they think would be effective here. Maybe they know things, and I'm sure they have things that we don't know. And they might say, this is gonna work this easy way, and we're like, wow, we didn't think about this.
Okay.
So, absolutely, there's a lot of ways. We can go to talk to them, we can invite them here, we can have workshops, and all those options gonna be available to us.
Okay.
I think so. Along the road, we just need to get to some place that we have something to present. This is the first time we're talking about this, and we ourselves have a lot of questions that we don't have answers to.
Yeah.
So we need to get some clarity on this, and then go out to community.
So I would recommend at this point that we invite this fellow that you recommend for our next meeting. And if he can't make it that meeting, we'll continue to keep this idea on the agenda to discuss it further. We're kind of running out of time, and we have one more item we have to talk about. And so we pick this up, and maybe he can join by Zoom, or
Mhm.
is it possible to change the time and date of the meeting in order to accommodate him?
As long as we have a good advance notice to the public of a meeting date change, we
Okay.
can do that.
Okay, I know we're kind of limited amongst us, but and I wouldn't want to exclude anybody, but I'm just saying, we might have to be flexible. Maybe
Now-
Zoom will do it.
I can reach out to him tomorrow morning, and then we'll know really quick if he's available that date, or if we need to start looking at another date for May.
That sounds great. Okay, so to be continued next meeting. So the last issue that we need to talk about is the idea about the outside presentation issue.
Yes, and I did not provide the form where it was left with all the edits and such, because the one pending item that I had told you was I had reached out to the city clerk, and I hadn't heard at that meeting that we were going over the form, the draft form. I had not heard back from the city clerk, but I have now. And there really was a conversation of like, and I was trying to explain what it is, what this form would accomplish for this board. And it is not recommended for an advisory board to create a form like this. So advisory boards, commissions have the same resolution as like the city commission. Just think about it, does the city commission have a form where anyone can fill out a request to present to them? There's a lot of advisory boards. I did check with some of them because I was like, okay, this is what I'm getting, like it's not recommended, and I want to see what other advisory boards, especially some of these new ones. Some of them are 100%, they do not allow or invite anybody who's wanting to present to them. Now, they may be working on something where they need information, right? They're working on their priority, and they need information from an organization or an individual, and they reach out to that person to see if they're available, or that group to see if they're available to present. I think Ahab was one of the ones that was saying that, at one point, like, they needed a certain training for the board members, and so it was discussed with the board, and there was somebody identified to come in and give that presentation/training. There are others, like, very specific, like with the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, where it's really related to like a park where somebody's donated the land for a city park, and they're working on a grant application, so they're giving that presentation because they need a letter of support from the advisory board. Like things like that. So it's very aligned with the work and the KPIs. Now, this doesn't mean that these boards are saying, absolutely, nobody can come and talk to us about any topic, related to their group. You have public comment, that section for that. So somebody can absolutely give you a 3-minute presentation on any, topic that's not on your agenda, and that maybe it's not something you're currently working on, but they can certainly give you information that way. Sometimes, the chair, somebody might ask the person some additional questions to just get further information, so that's okay. You don't have to take action on items that are brought up for public comment.
No, but if someone has public comment and we find it could be informative, we could then consider inviting them to come and talk in the future. But
Absolutely.
But basically, it's we invite them.
Yes.
They don't invite themselves.
Yes.
Okay.
So an invite-only situation.
So that's like, so from now on, recommendation is if somebody's like, oh, I want to come talk to the board, you say, well, come for the first 3 minutes, have a 3-minute presentation. You're always welcome to do that. And then if we decide it's worth seeing more, we will invite you.
Absolutely, and this was part of the conversation when you all were talking about this form. I think somebody had mentioned, like, isn't that what public comment is for? Is to present a topic, and if you did want more information, that you would seek that. So again, not saying this board wouldn't want to invite new topics. You do already because, you have the public comment within your agenda. So if you feel comfortable going that direction and just, the form, there was conversations about, does it have to be a form that would be official to all these advisory boards that would be the same, but not everyone wants this, There was conversation of if we had a form like this for absolutely every board and commission, would that then send the wrong message of hey, we just want to fill up our meetings with presentations versus, you guys have very limited time. Right now, we feel like we're rushing, to get you out at a good time, like we normally wrap up. But, it's really, it's your time, okay.
I think
Getting a few.
I think the invite only works, and I think it's also on, unless I'm not remembering what I signed when I joined this, but I think it's also kind of on our plates to be connected with communities. So if there is a group like the one that came, Save the Wakarusa, that has an issue, one of us can just meet with them or go to their meeting and get a good sense of what they're interested in and bring that here, right? That we're supposed to liaise.
You can absolutely attend a meeting. You do not want to introduce yourself at a meeting as the vice chair of the Environmental Sustainability Advisory Board.
But if-
You don't speak on behalf of the board, but you're an individual who can absolutely attend, gather information, and bring it back to this board, yes.
So they can show up and give public comment, and then we can invite them in. But also, because we're individuals living in our community, if they say, hey, I have an issue that I think the board should consider, we can just talk with them and then liaise to the board, right? Okay.
Yeah.
It does create a little bit of a dilemma for the one person who we kind of promised we would at least give the ability to come present something. Unfortunately, that also, based on where we are right now, has nothing to do with what this group is doing. So,
I'm friends with her, I can talk with her.
okay.
Then you could give a decent, can they share screen if they're doing it on Zoom and have slides for 3 minutes? Is that okay? Or is that something they can't do and they can just talk?
It is. It's actually part of the agenda at the very top. It talks about if there's a handout that somebody that is going to speak at public comment, how many copies they need to have, and if they have slides, it talks about where they have to submit it and by what time and date. Yeah.
So that's good, and I
So
feel like.
there's a procedure, and that is standard to all
Right.
groups. This is not just a ESAB thing.
Yeah.
That's all fine. There was also, in that introductory meeting, which seems like it was decades ago at this point, but there was a lot of talk made about 2 members of a committee can't have a phone conversation because it's not public. And so I guess I'm a little confused between let's go talk to people and you're not allowed to talk outside of the committee. So if that was clear, or I guess that's not clear to me at this point, but
Yeah.
whatever the rules are there, I don't want to break rules by just
Yeah.
chatting with people
No, but we
because
can
that's
go
normal.
chat with whoever we want.
Yes.
I'm part of a.
Well, there was some whole thing about you're
That
not
ex-
allowed to.
Yeah.
Allowed to group, to
That
meet as a
example-
subcommittee.
That example of the phone conversation is when you might call Nancy and you say, hey, I attended this meeting and this is what I gathered, and I think the ESAB should do this, blah, blah, blah. So now you've ended your conversation and you call Mosen and you give him the same information. Or Nancy calls Mosen and says, hey, I heard this information was gathered and this is, so now you have a train, right? You have a chain of people who are talking to each other that are going to get past that quorum. And that's that's what they don't want at all.
So you can talk to anybody you want, but you can only share the information at this table. Is that basically it?
If it's for the
If it's,
Board.
if it's for the board, because the public has to be able to have
Yeah.
access to that
But
information.
if you're just talking to friends about it, yeah, it doesn't matter.
If you and I got a beer after I also went to another meeting as myself,
Yeah.
but we didn't talk about it, then it'd be fine.
Yes, okay.
The business of the board is done.
Yeah.
The business of the board
issue.
has to be done here
Yes.
versus the way it used to be where you could have subcommittees and do some work and bring it to the board. as a
Okay,
whole,
that makes
which is
sense.
nice.
did want to just briefly mention, this is more related to the previous topic than this third item, but just wanted you all to be aware, and this is public information, that the city of Lawrence was an intervener in the latest Evergy docket case with the KCC. So the testimony that we provided is a public document. In what our position was, which we were not opposing the two natural gas plants and then the solar farm in Douglas County. The natural gas plants are in other counties. But we had asked Evergy for a few things to work with us, partner with us and work with us to help us with our sustainability goals. So that was kind of our focus area. There was other communities as well, Johnson County and Overland Park, that kind of joined in similar type of conversations and became interveners in this case. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. I can give you a copy of what that testimony talks about, but it's the reason why I say it's related to the previous item is because we were talking about energy efficiency programs for Kansas and obviously specific to the city of Lawrence, but for Kansas. We were asking for any unused space in the Lawrence Energy Center to be battery storage and any other space that may be created in the future if some of those units shut down to be battery storage. We did talk about the possibility of having 24/7 renewable energy, so a tariff for that, because that's an economic development thing where there are some businesses that don't come to Kansas because there's not a possibility for them to be powered by 100% clean renewable energy for the 24 hours, 7 days a week that they're operating. So a lot of these topics were on there. We did ask for, investment in EV infrastructure, EV charging infrastructure, as well as investment in bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Those items did not quite make it to the next stage, but the talks about energy efficiency, community solar, battery storage, a lot of that are items that Evergy did mention in our settlement paperwork that they would be happy to have further conversation with. So,
Good, that lays the groundwork for us.
yeah, absolutely. So again, we really want to build great relationships with our utilities to work through this. We cannot do it without them. So, yeah, it's been a great process to be a part of and having those conversations, and they understand why those items are important to us and to Johnson County and Overland Park. And Mr. Gupta was great help in this process too. Just so you all know, he was helping us through the unknown because we have not been interveners in something like this before.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, should we adjourn?
Yep.
Motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Great job, thank you.
Yeah, nicely done putting all this together.